we're going to go over building a sharded environment. Now, this is something that is probably more of a DBA task, but if you want to develop on your own computer and play with sharded environments, then you need to be able to do this. And it looks a little bit daunting at first, but it's not actually as bad as it seems. So once we go through it, hopefully you'll be able to do it yourself. I definitely suggest that you download the script that I wrote and give it a try on your own computer. And if it doesn't work, just play around and you can probably get it working in not too long. So we're going to create a sharded environment with 2 shards, and each one is going to be a replica set. So this will be shard 0, and shard 0 is going to contain this replica set right here of these 3 nodes. I'll put an R for replica set. And then we're going to create another one, shard 1, and it's going to have its own replica set of 3 Mongos. These are all going to run on my computer. You would never do this way in the real world. We're going to have to play around with port numbers because obviously you can't reuse the same port in the same host. So that's probably also something you wouldn't do in the real world. And then I haven't talked about it yet, but you're going to need some config servers. So these config servers are little Mongo servers that keep track of where the different shards are. And they're not running in a replica set. There's actually some sort of agreement protocol between them, and there's a 2-phase commit when you want to move things around. In production, you typically use 3 of them. In development, you can get away with using 1 of them, but I'm going to use 3 of them just for good practice. And again, these are also MongoDs. So you can see here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 MongoDs. And then my little router, my MongoOS, that's going to talk to these guys for me, and then my application over here, it would actually talk to my MongoOS. All right, so let's get started and see how we would do that. So the first part of this is you have to figure out where you're going to put your data. So I put it in /data on my computer, and that's where I am now. And the way I decided to do it was I created 3 subdirectories, shard 0 and shard 1. Actually, I created one for shard 2, but I didn't build anything there. And in shard 0, I've got a directory for replica set 0, 1, and 2. Okay? Well, that's actually the first node of the replica set, the second, and the third. And then in shard 2, I have the same thing. Shard 1 rather the same thing. And these are empty to start, but these directories are where Mongo is going to put its data directories for each of those nodes in the replica set. And then I did the same thing for the config server. But let me show you my script, and you can see how it works. All right. So I created a script called init sharded env.sh, and it's a bash script essentially. It's a little wider than this window, so forgive that. It's going to be a little hard to read, but it's pretty straightforward. First thing we're going to do is we're going to start a replica set and tell it that it will be a shard. So how do you do that? So first I created the directories, shard 0 rs0, shard 0 rs1, and shard 0 rs2. And then I made it just a regular old replica set. So I started him out, and I told him he's a replica set, and here's his log path, and I gave a log file so I can keep track of these. Here's his data path. I give him a port. So these servers run on ports 37017, 018, and 019. And I told it to fork, and I also told it that it's eventually going to be a shard server. So you have to do that to make it work. All right. So it's got both the -repl set flag and the -shard server flag. Now, after you do this, after you run these 3 servers, they don't really know they're a replica set yet, and so this is the same as it was last time. So this next part of the shell script is something that's familiar to shell programmers from yesteryear. It's called a here document. Basically, it says to invoke Mongo, which is this Mongo shell, and connect to 37017, so it's going to connect to this guy, and then take this document from here to here and just run it into standard input for the Mongo shell. So this is going to be the command that creates the replica set. I just didn't want to create a separate JS file, so I just put it all into the shell script. Basically, it sets a config file. It says S0, here are my members right here at 37017, 018, and 019. And it creates a config document, and it calls rs.initiate, and that's it. And now at this point, one of my replica sets that's going to make up my shard 0 is up and running. I do the same thing for shard 1. I create the data directories if they don't already exist for shard 1 rs0, shard 1 rs1, and shard 2 rs1. And then I start these 3 servers with -repl set s1, because these are all going to be part of the S1 replica set, which is going to be the shard 1. I give some log paths, and then I give the correct data path for each of these servers. I create some non-conflicting port numbers, in this case 47017, 47018, and 47019, and the minus shard server option for each of them. Again, I do the same trick of in this shell script, which is going to be run against bash. I just specify that I want to run Mongo, and I want to connect to 47017, which is the first one, and please input into the Mongo shell this document right here, which is going to initiate the second replica set. So at this point, I have 2 replica sets, but I now need to start my config servers so that I can get this thing all initiated. So I do that over here. All right, I create 3 different directories for my config servers in this make dir command, one for each of the MongoDs, and then I run these 3 separate MongoD commands. And again, I give non-conflicting ports 57017, 57018, and 57019. And I tell it to fork, and I tell it that it is a config server. Okay? And then now we're kind of with 3 pieces, but they don't necessarily all work together. We have 2 replica sets, they've been initiated. We have some config servers, but what do we do to actually get this thing to work? So what I do is I start a Mongo S on the standard port. There's no port number given here. And I tell it, all right, that this is its log path, and I tell it where the config servers are. So the way Mongo S works, you just tell it where the config servers are. And now I need to get this all working, right? So the way this works is, all right, I call Mongo, and I don't give any port specification. And what that's going to do is it's going to connect to the Mongo S, okay, because the Mongo S is running and listening on the standard MongoD port. So it's a little bit weird to think of it as listening on a MongoD port, but that's what it does, right? If you have an application or Mongo, it sort of stands in for Mongo and redirects. So it listens on the standard port in this case. So just a little warning, I tried on my Mac to not use the standard port for Mongo S and have it listen on some other port, and I never got that working. The issue was I was able to get this part working. I got Mongo S running, but I couldn't get my Mongo to connect to it. So I gave up on that and then went to the standard port, which is probably the good idea anyway, but just so you realize, I'm not sure if it's a bug or if it has to do with the fact that I was all on localhost, but it didn't work. It's fine, it works this way. So again, I run the Mongo shell and send it everything here. Now, these are the commands to add these 2 shards, and this is going to bring it all together, right? So Mongo shell is talking to the Mongo S. The Mongo S knows about the config servers. The problem is the config servers don't know about the shards, which are replica sets. So they have to know about it. So this ties it together and makes it so that it all works. db admin command, add a shard, S0 / the one of the hosts in it. This is essentially a seed list. So this is a seed list, and it'll discover the rest of them. And then add another shard, S1. Again, it's a seed list. It'll discover, we gave it one of the nodes in the replica set. It'll discover the rest of them. And then I had to enable sharding on a database, so I did. I enabled it on a test database. And then I said I wanted to shard the collection test.grades, which is it's the grades collection that I've been playing with in the previous lessons. And I said that the key for that is student ID 1. Now, just a little word of warning, if the collection doesn't exist, then MongoD will do it fine, and it will also create an index on student ID, which I'll talk to you about in a second, is a requirement that there be an index on the starting prefix of the shard key. But if the collection does exist, then before you're allowed to shard it, you need to have created that index. So if it's a brand new collection, you've never done anything before, and you know that from the beginning that you want to shard, which is probably unusual. The more usual case is probably that you have a collection on a single replica set, you decide you want to shard it, and so what you're going to do is you're going to bring up a second replica set, some config servers, you're going to bring it into a sharded configuration, you're going to enable sharding on the database, and then you're going to have to make sure that there's an index on whatever you want the shard key to be. So in fact, when I tried it, I actually got an error when I did this in the shell because I hadn't created that index yet. But in this case, if you're actually running my script, the test.grades collection won't exist yet, so you should be okay. But I actually imported the collection first, so I actually ran into the problem. Anyway, so that's it. And then after that, this thing should be up and running. So I ran all that on my computer, and it won't run it for you right this second because I already imported the data, so it'd be a little bit inconvenient. And I will show you what it looks like when I now run Mongo S. So if I run Mongo. All right. Oh, by the way, I'll just show you all the stuff running. All right. So those are my Mongo Ds. There should be 9 of them. Let's count them. 10 of them. I'm not sure whether 10 of them. Oh, it's the grep itself is the 10th. Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah. So there are 9 of them. So we're going to run Mongo, and it's going to connect to the at the default port on localhost, which is going to connect to the Mongo S. So now this for the first time you're seeing this, which is a Mongo shell reporting that it's actually connected to a Mongo S versus a Mongo D. So that's a new thing right there, and you should just take note of it. And that tells you that you're connected to a sharded environment. All right, and then if I look at all my shard help commands, I can see what they are. Of course, the help one I just ran, and add shard, enable sharding. I can get the status of the shard system. Let's do that. sh.status. All right. So a little hard to read. What it's telling me is that there are 2 shards right here up and running, each one a replica set. It looks like it discovered all of the hosts in the replica set, which makes sense because it was a seed list, so it discovered the rest of them. And then there's the database, there's the admin database, which is not partitioned, the test database, which is partitioned, meaning that it is sharded. And then it's telling you the chunks. We talked about those chunks. So from min key, which is the lowest possible student ID that you could possibly represent in the database, all the way to 1, it's going to put that on S1. And then it shows you can see the ranges of student IDs and the different shards they're on. If I then go to the grades collection and ask for its stats, it'll also tell me that it's sharded. So you can see here that it reports that it's sharded true, that it's got, looks like 2 million documents in it. It's pretty big actually right now. And its size looks like 432 megabytes, I believe. That's not that big. And then you can see here it talks about the shards that exist and the number of documents on each of the shards. Looks like it's pretty well balanced, I guess. Let's see, size 2.3. Yeah, 200 megabytes, I think, on each of these servers. And if I do a query on it, so I'll do a query, grades.find, student ID, :1. Document looks similar to what you've been playing with all along. You remember this structure. And if I do an explain on it, you can see that I'm going to get more information than I got before. In particular, I'm going to find out that to do this particular query, it looked at the shard S1, parallel sort, and I don't think it looked at shard S0, which makes sense. And so that tells you how efficient it was, whether it had to go to multiple shards to answer it or just to go to 1. And you can see that once it got into this shard, it used the B-tree cursor student ID index. Because remember, there isn't an index on student ID. There had to be an index on student ID for me to shard on student ID. Now, if I do a query that doesn't include any criteria, it should have to go to all the shards. So I'll do that. All right. So here you can see it went to both shard S0 and S1 in order to answer this query, and that once it was in there, it used the basic cursor because there was no criteria specified. All right. So that kind of gives you an idea of what a sharded environment looks like, and hopefully you'll create one yourself so that you can play with it and understand how it works. And we'll talk more about it. Now let's do a quiz. All right, and the question is, if you want to build a production system with 2 shards, each one a replica set with 3 nodes, how many MongoDB processes must you start?